everyone. Welcome to Bible 365 with Kathy Carter. So I'm giving a trigger warning. This is today's passages are dealing with some tough stuff, right? Not all of it, but some of it. This is various rules that Moses is he's reiterating for the Israelite people, but we're kind of getting a lot of them for the first time. So welcome to Bible 365 with Kathy Carter, which is me. Bible 365 means we're going through the Bible in 365 days. I am using the 1 Year Chronological Bible reading plan, which you can find online at the 1 Year Bible, the 1 Year Chronological Bible online.com. And so you can download a free printable and read along with me. So today we are in the book of Deuteronomy, which is written by Moses. We are reading, it's day 78, so I haven't mentioned that yet. And we're reading Deuteronomy 21:10 through 25:19. And so my very short introduction is that we are on the outside of Israel, waiting to get in there, waiting to get into the land of Canaan, which is the land of Israel. These are the Israelite people who have been set apart, who have been made holy, who God says, I'm going to show the world who I am through you. And so I'm going to make you holy, and then I'm going to show the world how holy I am. This is all about making God really big and the people having an understanding of who God is. And so some of these things are really difficult. It's really challenging. And I want to let you know that I am a person who lives in a free country. I have been brought up in an area in which women thrive. They have jobs. They have, they don't have to have jobs, but they can have jobs if they want to have jobs. They can stay home and take care of their children. If they want to stay home and take care of their children, they can have children. They don't need to have children. They are not persecuted. And I have lived this way my entire life. I grew up in a house of, there were two of us, and we were both girls. And I grew up with two parents. And my dad taught us that we could be whatever we wanted. It just required work and dedication, and we could do whatever we wanted. There were no limits on us. And so I had a ton of freedom. I still believe that I have a ton of freedom. I believe that, again, I still believe that I can kind of do whatever I want. I'm not talking inside God's laws. I want to be very clear. I'm talking about in the country in which I live in. So reading a lot of this stuff in the very beginning of the chapter is really challenging. And it's also, again, we're living in a time, and I know I've mentioned this before, where people are starting to no longer believe that there's a God, or try and convince you that God is bad. And they're using a lot of these passages in order to do this. So I actually think some of these passages are really, really important passages not to gloss over, right? Not to ignore, not to forget, and not to pretend like they're not there, and not to pretend like they didn't mean anything, because they did. They meant something then, and therefore they mean something now. So what do they mean then? And then obviously as we get further and further into the Bible, we're going to find out more of what they mean now and how that matters. So he is speaking to the Israelite people. He's speaking to the Israelite people in, I think it's about give or take 1400 BC, before, I'm going to say before Christ, because that's kind of what I learned in high school. So it is before Christ was born. Christ was born in about, like, I think 30 AD. So anyway, so I would just want to start out with the very beginning of this. And there are two sections in which they talk about women. So starting this first one, Deuteronomy 21:10. So we're moving on. And I said 21 through 25, right? So it's like 21:10 through 25. When you go to war against your enemies, so already there's a clear understanding, and we've learned a couple of chapters, or I think just right the chapter before yesterday, that they are going to go to war. So they're going to go to war. Well, obviously they're going to go to war with the people who are living in Canaan. So they're going to go to war with those people. And then they're going to go to war, it says, with people outside of their nation, like not their close neighbors, but people kind of outside and further away. So when you go to war, not if you go to war, when you go to war against your enemies, and the Lord God delivers them into your hands and you take captives. If you notice among the captives a beautiful woman and are attracted to her, may take her as a wife. Bring her into your home, have her shave her head, trim her nails, and put aside the clothes she was wearing when captured. After she lived in your house and mourned her father and mother for a full month, then you may go to her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. If you are not pleased with her, let her go wherever she wishes. You must not sell her or treat her as a slave, since you have dishonored her. I kind of read the whole section because I didn't want to miss pieces of it. I'm going to say, historically, this was a time where women needed to be taken care of by men. And so this was a time and a place, right? Very specific. It was a time and a place. There was always an audience in what we're reading, right? Like sometimes we go, oh, I'm the audience. And while that's slightly true, you were never the first audience, right? Like, so I am not the people of Israel, right? I am not, first of all, I'm not the people that Moses is talking to in the land of right outside of Israel, right outside of Canaan. I'm not that people. So that's the first audience. And then the second audience who would be reading it, which are all the generations after that, right? So Moses or somebody with Moses wrote all this down. And so all the generations after that are supposed to take this and understand that this is according to their people group. That's not me. That's this people group. So an audience is key, right? And I'm making this a big point because I don't want to take away and pretend like there isn't a reality of this situation. So audience is key. And so the audience was men. And as if we remember, if we go back several chapters, men between the ages of 20 and 60 were worth a certain price. Women were worth a lesser price. Men are the ones that are in charge of all of these things. And I'm not saying women aren't important in this camp. Miriam was a prophet. Miriam was Moses and Aaron's sister, excuse me. Moses and Aaron were brothers, and Miriam was her sister, and she was a prophet. She had a place, she had a position. That's not what these average people were, right? Because there was Moses, and then there were the Aaron and his family, which were the high priests, and then there were elders, right? And then there were priests and people who take care of the holy things, right? So you can see there are all these dynamics. And then there are the leaders of their tribes, and then there are just kind of the regular Israelites. And this is talking to all of those people. So when those people go to war, right? So when those people go to war and they've killed all the men in that town, there is no longer anyone there to take care of the women. So who does that leave to take care of the women? The women are unable to take care of the women. That leaves the men, therefore, to take care of the women. So they could be widows, right? And who takes care of the widows? Well, everything that's given to the Levites, if you remember, pieces of that go out to the fatherless, right? To the orphans, the widows, right? So all these people. Best case scenario, believe it or not, is for them to be wives to these men. So this is really, in some ways, that is the most honoring to these women, is to make them wives. So you make them wives. Before they are made wives, they are still foreign. They are lands that have been overtaken by the Israelites, which means that they're wicked areas, because remember, there are certain people that God does not let the Israelites take. So Edom was one of them, right? Because Edom was relatives. Egypt was one of them because they lived in the land of Egypt. And so there are certain areas that he says those lands are off limits, but these lands, right? These people are against me as God. And so you're able to take these people. So the women, again, are people that are against God. So they need to come in and they need to be made holy, right? So they come in, they're made holy, they are given the opportunity to marry these men that are these Israelite men that marry these men and produce children, right? So it doesn't sound good. And even as I say it, there's so many things in the Old Testament that I really have trouble with because of where I live and because of the opportunities that I've been given. But the truth is at that time, I genuinely believe historically, this would have been better for them, right? So this is a better than scenario. And so they have time to mourn, right? They're given an entire month to mourn. So they have time to mourn. They have time to be cleansed and to become holy. And then they come in and then they marry the Israelite men. Now, it also says that they have the opportunity to if they're unhappy with them, then they have the opportunity to get rid of them. But they're not to treat them like a slave. They are not to treat them like a servant in the house, but they are to let them go where they choose. So they're going to be given a choice in the matter. All right, now, second part, which again, I'm having trouble with. It says it's if a man has two wives. Right away, I'm already bothered, right? Why does a man have two wives? I thought God said one wife, one husband, right? This is the way it's supposed to be. So again, I'm going to go back to what was happening historically. And there were men with multiple wives for the same reason that I just discussed. Women needed to be taken care of. And whether I like it or not, uh, this was a time in which that men took care of the women, and they took care of the women by marrying them and producing children with them. This is how women had value, was to be mothers, to raise their families. And so men had, in this time, multiple wives. Not best case scenario, not what we say God wants in the very beginning. It was male and female, right? One of each. And so this is what God's perfect plan is, but that is not what's happening in this land right now. But I have to admit, he doesn't call them to divorce the wives. So there's something more honoring in taking them as wives than there is in only having, in being just one wife. All right. So it says, and he loves one. So this, again, this is a good thing. The two wives thing messed with me, but when he has two wives, there's a likelihood he's going to love one more than he's going to love the other. And when he loves one more than the other, the firstborn remains the firstborn. So say he loves wife number two, and we actually saw this with Rachel and Leah, right? So Jacob loved Rachel, and he did not love Leah, or maybe he loved her less. But what we know is he did not love Leah, and so he treated Rachel better. If you remember, Rachel's children were treated better. They were put forth. They were actually protected more when he went out to meet Esau, went out to meet his brother. Um, and so this is essentially stating that they're not allowed to do that, that when the firstborn is born, it doesn't matter which wife you prefer, but that the firstborn will always get double the portion, which again is something that to remember, that your firstborn gets double, your firstborn son gets double, and then the rest gets spread out amongst the other sons. And so they have to treat that firstborn as if it's a firstborn. So those were two of my admittedly most sticky of areas. And then there's kind of like various and sundry things after this. So some of the things I want to hit on is in verse 18, talking about stubborn and rebellious sons. So this one is really tough also. If they have a stubborn and rebellious son, they take him to the elders, and the elders are going to stone him. So we find out later, much later, and sometimes I hate to go forward to go back, but sometimes I just feel like it's there. We find out much later, these rules, we kind of figure they're entirely too difficult for us to follow every single one, right? Like our hearts are not set on enough of perfection in order to do this. I feel like this would be one of those things, right? Would I be willing to hand any of my children over to elders and say, this kid's a hot mess, time to stone him, right? Like, even if I recognize that my child is a hot mess, his life would hold more value to me than his death. And so I feel like as a mother, this would be one of, if not the most impossible rules to follow. And so I think that it's given for a very specific purpose, because holiness is the most important thing in God's eyes. Plain and simple. Holiness is the most important thing. I know we want to say love is the most important thing, but love is the result of holiness, right? Like, so he loves us, therefore he gives us the opportunity to be holy. But holiness is the most important thing. God is holy, and in order to be with him, he requires that we be holy as well. So love just gave us the opportunity, right? Love gave us Jesus in order to be holy. So I want to recognize that some of these things feel impossible. And I think that's the point. Do I in every way, shape, and form put God and his holiness above any of my own desires at all times? I'd have to say no, which I hate to say, but I'd have to say no. And of course, that's where Jesus steps in. But of course, my goal is always to strive to be holy and to be more like the Lord. So anyway, another tough one. All right, I want to move a little quicker through these because we can go through every single one of them and spend time on every single one, but I don't want to do that. So uh, let's see. I want to go just right into Deuteronomy 22 because I thought this was just an interesting parallel. Um, it says, let's say 22, verse 1. It says, if you see your fellow Israelites ox or sheep straying, don't ignore it, but be sure to take it back to its owner. So this sort of entire section from 1 all the way down to 12, there's a lot of like animal references in it. And so I was really trying to connect it to, because then there's a strange one that says in number 5, a woman must not wear men's clothing, nor a man wear women's clothing, for the Lord your God detests anyone who does this. And then we kind of go to another super famous one that people like to quote is verse 11, don't wear clothes of wool and linen woven together. So part of it is like, make sure you return that sheep, right? It kind of fell by the wayside. And then part of it is like, your clothes have to be holy. So everything is about being holy. All of these rules and lists are about being holy. I'm sure something connects all these things together, but maybe not necessarily. So some of these we have to look at and just say, in what way is God trying to keep these things holy, right? So not mixing linens, is he's keeping everything separate. So he's keeping it holy and he's keeping it everything separate and apart, right? Just like he's separating his people are separate and holy apart from everything else. And clothing is the same exact way. Again, dressing like a man or dressing like a woman, right? And I don't skirt, pants, right? Like I don't think that there's necessarily a wardrobe, so to speak, but not 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 taking on the other form, right? So keeping yourself holy in what you've been created by God, right? So there's this holiness to what you are and how you've been created by God. And then this imagery of taking the sheep back, the sheep straying, for me, this again, sort of going forward a little bit today, probably bad form, but this image of the sheep straying and you bringing the sheep back in and you bringing like housing the sheep if you don't can't find the person, or if, and waiting for that person to come and get the sheep, or bringing the sheep back to the person in which it belongs, right? So not turning, not allowing the sheep to roam free, right? All these Israelites, what they're doing and what I believe we as followers are doing, keeping ourselves holy to the Lord, right? Keeping our sheep together. And then we as people doing the same thing to each other. What could be more loving than reminding a fellow believer, fellow Israelite, fellow countryman, fellow Christian, right? That you are holy. Maybe what you're doing right now isn't holy. So let me bring you in and help you remain holy, right? In order to remain remain in the house with a holy God. And so I think it's a visual. It's both real, right? Obviously, it's a very literal thing, and it's also a really nice visual of, I think, what he wants his people to do for each other. All right. So then we're going to move on. I want to move on to some of this sleeping around and kind of things, because these are other things that I feel are pretty tough. So sexual purity, some of these things we're going to see in the future, and it's always astounding to me how much he's laid out for us in advance, thousands of years in advance, that we get to see happens. So wives need to remain pure before they come into marriage. Yes, fine. If a wife comes into a marriage and a man says she's not pure, there's some options. Dad and mom can come in and say, actually, she was pure, and then he gets punished. Or there's no proof and says she wasn't pure, and then she gets punished, right? This is all a matter of saying pure, remaining pure to a holy God. All right. Then, and I'm saying this because future again, but this reminds me obviously of the thing that between Joseph and Mary, right? Like Mary was betrothed and she was pregnant. And so Joseph should have actually brought her to the elders and said that she wasn't pure, and she should have been stoned to death. And so it's just interesting how things turn out based on the way that people respond and behave. So, and obviously God did this to her. But anyway, So moving on, it says, if we go into verse 22, it says, if a man is found sleeping with another man's wife, both of them will die. 23, if a man meets a woman in town, she's a virgin, and he sleeps with her, then if she doesn't scream out, then they both will die, right? Because she's in a town, there's a lot of people around. And I think what it's leading us to believe is that there was consent there. Hard to know the verses between the two, because the next section, it says if a man rapes a girl in the a virgin again in the country, she didn't have the opportunity to scream out, and so only he gets put to death. She doesn't have any responsibility for that. So it's a different word. So in the one with the two with the girl in town, it's just lying with. So laying with, being with, assuming a sexual relation. But in the second one, where it's in the country, it actually says forcing her to lie with. So they've added that in. So again, I think the understanding is that because she didn't shout out, because she didn't let anyone know, but people found out, then it was likely that it was what we would call consensual. And so there's different punishments for that. All right, and then in verse 28, if a man happens to meet a virgin and it says it rapes her, so here we go with being forced again, and they're discovered, he's going to pay for her and he's going to marry her, and he's not allowed to divorce her. So he's never allowed to divorce her. He keeps her in his family. All right, so more rules about women that don't feel that great. All right, now we're going to go down to, again, staying holy, right? The people who aren't allowed in the assembly of the Lord. And so anyone who's been emasculated, I'm just going to use the term eunuch. So any man who is a eunuch is not going to be allowed in the assembly. Anyone that's of a forbidden family, their descendants aren't allowed to even be in there. So they're not allowed to be in there. Their descendants aren't even allowed to be in there. No Ammonites and no Moabites, they're not allowed to be in there. And generations after them are not allowed to be in there. But an Edomite and then an Egyptian, I thought this was the other day, but it's not, it's today. So an Edomite and an Egyptian, they are related to you. And so after the third generation, they're actually allowed to be in there. So it says you're not allowed to despise them. And then they're eventually allowed to be in there after a couple of generations. So let's just use the example of today. They become citizens after a few generations. And so then they're allowed to be a part of the assembly of the Lord. All right. So 9 to 14, this is about it being encamped in war. And so what he says is, so it, again, he's making the analogy that the war, where they go to war, so wherever that is, it's not going to be in the land of Canaan, so they kind of step out of that area. But that entire area is considered holy where they are. So they're not allowed to do anything inside that area. They have to go to the bathroom outside of that area, right? So that area is to remain holy. And it says because God is actually among them and watching them and helping them, because remember, God is on their side. And so if they go to war, according to God, of course, then God will be with them in the war, and he's actually going to be with them in the war. All right. So I want to move down to, because I'm kind of coming to the end, and I want to come down to, and again, there's just so many laws in here that we can go over. But in Deuteronomy 25, so just moving into that next section, when people have a dispute, they're to take it to court, and judges will decide the case, acquitting the innocent and condemning the guilty. If the guilty deserves to be beaten, the judge will make him lie down and have him flogged in his presence. It's never supposed to be more than 40 lashes, which again, there's this supernatural, I'm going to say, number 40 that we see all the time, 40 days and 40 nights. Moses was up in the, so Noah was there, the flood was 40 days and 40 nights. Moses was up in the mountain with God 40 days and 40 nights. If you remember, he came down and then he went back up again for 40 days and 40 nights. And he was fasting for 40 days and 40 nights. And so it says no more than 40 lashes. So is it a literal 40? I think they took it very literally here. I think we know that they gave 40 lashes. And so even as we went forward into Paul gets 40 lashes here and there. So I think that they take it very literally. I also think there's something to be said about, I don't think that's the number of completion, because I think 7 is the number of completion, but there's also something holy about the number 40. And so God is creating that for a certain purpose, possibly something for us to know and for us to try and understand. All right. And then we're going to go on to marriage. So if a brother dies, then he is supposed to, two brothers are living together, married, one is married, the husband dies, leaves a widow, and then he's supposed to marry her. And once he marries her, he's supposed to have a child with her, and that child is supposed to be a descendant of the dead brother. Land, territory, tribe, this is all extremely important to the people of Israel. I hope you can hear me with the dog barking. This is all extremely important to the people of Israel. And so this isn't just to get her a son, which I think is actually really important, because if you guys remember what I just talked about not so long ago, is women didn't have the power in order to take care of themselves. So this son would take care of her, right? So her having a son would give her an opportunity to be taken care of for the rest of her life. So she won't be a widow that has to be taken care of by the Levitical, all the extra Levitical priests, some sort of their leftovers. So a son would give her that opportunity to be taken care of. However, that name will also live on. And so that name will live on, and that name will have territory, that name will have land, that name will have rights and property. So all of these things will move on because of that name. That name will be part of a tribe. So anytime, they move, they know that they come back after that. Remember that 7 and that 40 years. So there's this whole system set up for Israel to keep their names and land and people group holy. All right. I think that's sort of the end. I want to handle one more thing, just go into verse 17. So 25:17, and this will be the last one. It says, remember what the Amalekites did to you along the way when you came out of Egypt. When you were weary and worn out, they met you on your journey and attacked all who were lagging behind. They had no fear of God. When the Lord your God gives you rest from all the enemies around you in the land he is giving you to possess as an inheritance, you shall blot out the name of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. So the Amalekites messed with them along the way, and so they're on the list. As they were journeying from Egypt, which I didn't give too much of that today, but as they were making their way from Egypt to the land of Canaan, sort of like how a tiger hunts the prey at the end, anyone who was lagging behind, which would have been the sick, the old, the young, right? And so they killed all those people. And so God has not forgotten who the Amalekites were. All right, that's it today. I think we're going to continue on a lot of these various rules tomorrow, so we'll see what ones kind of spark my interest and which ones we'll be talking about. I'd love to have your comments below. I know some of you are commenting, and I love to read them. I respond to you, so I want more comments. I'd love to hear what you guys read when you're reading this and what your thoughts are, especially in some of maybe the harder or stickier areas. If this has been a blessing to you, I would like you to hit the like button. I want you to share this page with anyone and everyone that you know loves the Lord, or anyone who is interested and just might be like sparking their interest to read the Bible. Like, what is it all about? Going back from the beginning. And I want you to subscribe to the channel, because that's what's going to get you this page every single day. Otherwise, you'll probably never find it. So I will see you next time. Keep reading.